Happy October, everybody. The patrons have spoken, from beyond the grave, perhaps. For though such a proposition may seem morbid, why else would they bestow upon us the dearly departed duo of ghostly wailing and fright? Today, we examine, in all of our woeful peril, these two undead beacons of the afterlife, Cofagrigus and Runerigus. Both evolutions of Yamask, the sarcophagus-based Cofagrigus has been around since Generation 5, while the Viking rune-inspired Runerigus was spawned from Yamask's Galarian regional variant in Generation 8. We charge into this sphere of uncertainty head-on as we ask, how good were Cofagrigus and Runerigus actually? And also, how good was this shirt actually? That's right, False Swipe finally has merch, and some nice ones too. If you like the question we ask in all of our videos as much as we do, be sure to pick up one of these awesome shirts or hoodies in a color you like with the link in the description below. And in this video, we'll be going over these competitive formats. Upon the release of Generation 5, the competitive world, much like Bart Simpson, was shocked and appalled for many reasons, of course. But in this particular instance, it was because everyone's beloved spin blocker from Generation 4, Rotom A, was no longer a spin blocker by virtue of branching off into form-specific types. How would we protect our precious entry hazards from rapid spin now? Everyone wondered. Especially as spikes looked better and more important than ever with the addition of Ferrothorn. Were we going to have to go back to the threatening but frail Gengar? Well, that did happen, but it wasn't Gar or bust, as everyone quickly discovered that Gen 5 had bestowed a bevy of ghost types upon them. This promised to be valuable for stifling not only rapid spin, but the stab attacks of many new dangerous fighting types Game Freak had seemingly gone out of their way to add as well. Among these ghosts, Cofagrigus stood out. Look at that absolutely enormous defense stat. Sure, in classic ghost type fashion, its HP stat wasn't great, but at base 58, it was actually pretty great by ghost type standards. It was significantly higher than the Rotom appliances. Cofagrigus even had an interesting ability, Mummy, which transferred the Mummy ability to any Pokemon that made contact with it. That would surely have many applications to mess with Pokemon that relied on their ability. For example, switching into a Poison Hail Gliscor's Ice Fang would transfer Mummy to the Gliscor, and it'd suddenly be losing health for the poison status that usually healed it. With all this in mind, surely there'd be some niche for Cofagrigus, right? To borrow a phrase from a great 2022 horror film, nope. Cofagrigus was completely outclassed by another Generation 5 ghost type, Jellicent, which packed an enormous HP stat, excellent half-water typing that blessed it with outstanding resistances, actually reliable recovery with Recover as opposed to the famously exploitable Pain Split that other ghosts were saddled with, and a usable speed stat alongside Taunt to shut down opposing defensive Pokemon. Cofagrigus couldn't compete with the incredible defensive presence Jellicent possessed within Generation 5 OU, and thus wasn't used. Fortunately, in UU, Cofagrigus revealed itself to be quite excellent, and not in the way that you would expect. Yes, it was a decent defensive ghost type, leveraging its huge bulk and useful immunities, such as Snorlax's normal stab, to throw around irritating Will-O-Wisps. However, that wasn't the set that it used most often, not by a long shot. In fact, it was quite rare. What really made Cofagrigus not just good, but one of the tier's very best, most defining Pokemon was going on the offensive. Yes, it seems weird, it's a slow Pokemon, and its base 95 special attack is certainly fine, but nothing that rocked the house down even if fully offensively invested, especially since the base power of its stab Shadow Ball and its complementary coverage Hidden Power Fighting weren't exactly compensating for it. However, Cofagrigus had more up its sleeve. First, it solved its speed issue with Trick Room, under which its appalling base 30 speed may as well have been Deoxys Speed's base 180. Being slow was now its greatest advantage. But what about its power issue? Well, Cofagrigus also had an incredible boosting move, Nasty Plot. It would have plenty of opportunity to pull both these moves off too, not just by virtue of its solid defensive typing, but also its superb bulk with max HP investment. We must emphasize just how good its typing was because UU was overrun by fighting types. Cofagrigus did not just pack a fighting immunity, but a fighting immunity that also resisted bug and was neutral to rock and ground. This meant it completely stuffed one of the most threatening late game cleaners in the tier, Moxie Choice Scarf Heracross, and in fact turned into an opportunity for itself also one of the most threatening late game cleaners in the tier. This was an incredible trait. Cofagrigus blew past offensive and defensive teams alike with its combination of manipulating speed and boosting special attack. Oh, and it did all of this while blocking rapid spin, which was excellent since Cofagrigus was particularly terrifying with spikes softening up the opponent. So all in all, Cofagrigus was a superb Pokemon in Generation 5 UU. Of course, Cofagrigus slot in quite nicely into a VGC format where his teammates could immediately make use of Trick Room. Cofagrigus has the enviable distinction of being a fake-out immune Trick Room setter thanks to its ghost typing, one of only 3 in the 2011 format which it debuted in. Its competitors, Jellicent and Chandelure, were the go-to picks thanks to their typing and additional offensive presence, and were frequent sights throughout the season all the way until Worlds, when Ray Rizzle, true to his nature, went in a different direction by using Gothitelle as his Trick Room setter en route to his second World Championship. One intrepid rookie, however, used Cofagrigus all season long to great success. That would be none other than Wolf Glick, playing VGC for the first time ever. While Jellicent's special bulk is much better than that of Cofagrigus naturally, Cofagrigus' defense is high enough to naturally handle almost any physical threat, even without investment. Wolf actually spec'd his Cofagrigus out with full special defense investment, ensuring it took anyone trying to exploit its lower stat by surprise. Cofagrigus might be walled by some dark types like Scrafty or Bisharp, but that's where Wolf would simply Will-O-Wisp instead. While Wolf didn't have quite the power of a Jellicent Water Spout or a Chandelure Fire Blast available, he took advantage of the typically frail spreads of the season, meaning Cofagrigus could still do decent damage without too much firepower. Make no mistake though, this was a trade of offensive presence for defensive utility, a playstyle preference that has often defined Wolf throughout different parts of his career. Wolf stayed committed to Cofagrigus while others didn't, bringing it to every tournament of the season, but it's hard to argue with the results. He won Virginia Regionals, US Nationals, and made his first ever Worlds top 8. While Wolf gave Cofagrigus an all-timer debut season, it got put back in the coffin pretty fast because come 2012, it wasn't the only mummy in town anymore. Dusclops and Dusknoir returned to VGC in 2012, and they brought pretty much everything Cofagrigus had, plus more bulk and the option to use Helping Hand. Cofagrigus' only appearance in the rest of Generation 5 was reliant on using the one thing that could set it apart from the Dusk family, its attacking stats. Sam Dr. Fidget Harzma pioneered an extremely unorthodox Calm Mind Cofagrigus at the 2013 Fort Wayne Regionals with a similar concept to Wolf. Shore up Cofagrigus' lackluster special bulk, but Dr. Fidget actually invested defense EVs and used Calm Mind to boost Cofagrigus, creating a self-reliant mon that could counter enemy Trick Rooms and potentially wall entire teams if given the opportunity. And this surprise tactic got him top cut at the event, though it didn't exactly start a new Cofagrigus trend. And special thanks to Wolf Glick for the information. Cofagrigus went through several notable changes in Generation 6. It, along with other ghosts, went through an inherent change in role. Previously, they had been considerably largely synonymous with entry hazard protection, given that Rapid Spin was the only way to get rid of those, but Defog changed that. That said, hazards remained important and so did spinners, as many teams didn't want to remove their own hazards just to clear the field. Speaking of hazards, Cofagrigus received one of its own in Toxic Spikes, making it much more threatening. Speaking of increased Cofagrigus threat level, its ghost stat was no longer resisted by Steel, and Hex had its base power buffed, making for a potentially fierce combination with Will-O-Wisp and Toxic Spikes. Sadly, Cofagrigus also had nerfs. It was much easier to hit it for significant super effective damage and remove the precious passive leftovers recovery it so relied on with the proliferation of a significantly buffed knockoff. And its hidden power fighting had been weakened from an already not amazing 70 base power to a relatively paltry base 65. Phew, that's a lot of changes. So how did they play out for Cofagrigus in practice? Sadly, not too well. It wasn't able to find a place in a newly power-crept UU that now featured monstrous Mega Pokemon. It dropped to RU, but it wasn't really much of a use there either. It wasn't offensively threatening enough against such a bulky tier that spammed Toxic all over the place. The Trick Room set was better if the metagame had more of an offensive lean than what Gen 6 RU offered. Cofagrigus couldn't much hack it as well either. It was okay, but the proliferation of stab, pursuit, and knockoff from top tier dark types like Drapion and Sneasel held it back from being as reliable as it needed to be. Its spin blocking wasn't needed, its Toxic Spikes weren't used much with the ever-present Venusaur always around to soak them up, and its walling capabilities were mostly outdone by fairy types. As such, Cofagrigus didn't have much to do in RU. It seemed that would be all she wrote for the Coffin Pokemon in Generation 6. Until it was discovered that it actually had an amazing niche in OU of all tiers, with the utter ruins Mega Medicham and its mighty high jump kick left teams in, players search for something that could slow it down. And Cofagrigus was exactly that. Not only did it completely blank high jump kick, its mummy ability meant that even if Mega Medicham hit it with Zen Headbutt, it'd take away huge power, and Mega Medicham would go from being impossibly strong to being nothing special. Being one of the few things that could be considered a Mega Medicham answer was already amazing enough, given the impossibility of preventing it from getting automatic KOs in most games, but it wasn't all Cofagrigus brought to OU. It was similarly effective against another high jump kick spamming Mega Pokemon, Mega Lopunny. Now, Mega Lopunny's Scrappy meant it could hit Cofagrigus once, but then Mummy would kick in and Mega Lopunny would be stonewalled. Beyond walling these incredibly bulky Pokemon, Cofagrigus' Toxic Spikes were excellent, as grounded poison types were incredibly rare, and being able to cripple staples like Keldeo was superb. Cofagrigus was also a superb spin blocker with its huge defense and Will-O-Wisp, allowing it to stuff the most popular spinner in the tier, Bulky Excadrill. Even switching into Cofagrigus, a defensive Pokemon, could be quite a pain, not just because of the status it spams so effortlessly, though that certainly played a significant role, but also because of Hex, which abused such status even more. Cofagrigus quickly rose from niche pick to a legitimate part of the ORAS OU metagame, which had to be respected and considered in the team builder, lest it bowl you over with its unique, effective set of attributes. It was quite an unusual journey for a Pokemon to be more or less useless in the lower tiers than to find a great niche in OU, but Cofagrigus proved itself to be the real deal with a heartwarming redemption arc. Cofagrigus may have been able to make use of Dusclops' absence from the 2014 regional decks if it weren't for the fact that it was also missing from that dex. As such, it didn't get to experience a resurrection until 2015, when it found some limited use on teams featuring Megas which appreciate Trick Room. Now it makes sense why the 2015 format would be good for physically bulky ghost types. It was full of Mega Kangaskhan, Mega Mawile, and Landorus Therian, all strong physical attackers who hated a Will-O-Wisp. The question then is, why on earth do you use Cofagrigus over Dusclops just for the item? Yeah, it's nice to hold a mental herb so you can't get taunted, but Cofagrigus could do that in Gen 5 too, and people still use Dusclop. No, it's for the ability. While Mummy hadn't been a shining part of Cofagrigus' Gen 5 usage, so many of 2015's big hitters relied on their ability to dish out damage, whether it was Kangaskhan's Parental Bond or Mawile's huge power. Cofagrigus is, in fact, more frail than Dusclops, but only by a bit. Once you pass Mummy on to someone else, you're on pace to live longer and help the rest of your team. Now, all that said, Cofagrigus wasn't a common pick because Trick Room teams weren't a common pick, being too setup reliant against a level of offensive power that VGC hadn't quite seen before. It was a rare pick, but still one capable of getting some good placements. Cash Costa, Amar Beg, and Jeremy Bell all top cut regionals by pairing Cofagrigus with their own explosive Megas. Metagross in Cash's case, Camerupt in Amar and Jeremy's. Cofagrigus certainly wasn't a top threat, but these teams were full of anti-meta tricks that were evidence of how varied the 2015 metagame was despite its infamous end in chalk. Past 2015, there was pretty much no reason to use Cofagrigus over its other ghost type cousin. But what about its British sibling? What about Runerigus? More on that later. With Generation 7's addition of Toxapex, Cofagrigus wasn't going to be making waves in OU anytime soon, and the increasing power creep of the lower tiers ensured UU and RU were to be beyond its reach once again. It wasn't unusable in RU or anything, but it was also outclassed as a wall by more reliable Pokemon like Cresselia and Slowbro. So that meant Cofagrigus went to NU, right? Oh, it went to NU alright, for all of 2 seconds. The offensive Trick Room set was absolutely impossible for the tier to withstand, especially as Cofagrigus now came equipped with Ghostium Z. Not only did this notably weaken power from opposing knockoffs, it gave Cofagrigus game-changingly explosive bursts of power. Its never-ending Nightmare instantly dropped pretty much anything offensive, while against bulkier teams, an easily procured Nasty Plot boost ensured the same. What made it particularly devastating was how its bulk and typing allowed it a seemingly endless set of opportunities to get going, and once it got going, the other team was hard-pressed to stop from dropping. When paired with Aurora Veil, Cofagrigus was so ridiculously bulky and thus unfair to the point of incomprehensibility, and as a result, it was almost instantly banned from NU. A few years later, Cofagrigus was retested in NU. The metagame was different now. Aurora Veil was banned. Surely this ghost type wouldn't be broken now, given how the tier was now populated by the bulky dark types Incineroar and Pangoro, right? And there was Mega Autono around to help matters further, right? Right? Wrong! Cofagrigus proved to be just as broken this time around for the same reasons. For how bulky it was, it had too easy a time boosting its power and blasting through the tier. Its bulk was downright absurd. It could easily withstand a Choice Bandit knockoff from Pangoro. Thus, the NU player base elected to end this nightmare before it began, and not bring Cofagrigus back to NU, thus capping off in spectacular fashion Cofagrigus' most brutally successful generation yet. The hype for the new addition to the Yamask family in Generation 8 was quite high. Runerigus was almost identical to Cofagrigus statistically, and the only difference being their swapped special attack and attack stats. Runerigus' Wandering Spirit ability was also Mummy in all but name. Their move pools were also quite similar, however that's where the similarities ended. Runerigus also possessed a partial ground typing, which brought with it unique traits. In addition to the valuable resistances afforded by this, it also received access to Stealth Rock and Stab Earthquake. The latter looked quite valuable off Runerigus' solid base 95 attack, especially in conjunction with the solid coverage of its other stab, Phantom Force, and later in the generation, Poltergeist. Plus, with the addition of Body Press, Runerigus could put that enormous base 145 defense stat to offensive use, especially if bolstered by Iron Defense. And of course, in addition to all this, it also packed the ever-useful Toxic Spikes. So how did Runerigus make use of all this potential? Well, for a brief time, Choice Specs Toxtricity was terrorizing Yu with the unhinged ferocity of the best punk rockers its design was inspired by. Its ability bolstered blistering blasts of brutal special attacks were nearly impossible to switch into, given its impeccable type coverage to go alongside with it. Until Runerigus showed up. Runerigus shut Toxtricity down harder than a band going through created differences. It was completely immune to Boom Burst and Overdrive, and its electric immunity, as opposed to its resistance, also meant Toxtricity couldn't maintain momentum on it with Vault Switch either. It didn't just resist Toxtricity's secondary stab, Sludge Wave either. It double resisted it. If you had Toxtricity on your team, wall breaking was the least of your concerns. Until Runerigus showed up. This alone was enough to give Runerigus a niche, but countering Toxtricity was pretty much the only thing it did, and this was not an efficient use of a team slot, even if it did also provide hazard support, though the latter was not as effective anymore, at least partially because of the influx of heavy-duty boots. It was passive, weak, and didn't heal well. Not good traits for a defensive Pokemon. If it had Recover, perhaps it'd be better off, but such luxuries are rarely bestowed upon ghost types. What really made this thing though, was that there was a Generation 7 ground ghost type, Polosand, and that did pack instant recovery and shore up. So as a result of being both not that great and outclassed, Runerigus fell through the tiering rung, not achieving much of anything. It had the occasional appearance, yeah. In NU it could set up rocks or go for a prolonged setup sweep with a set of Iron Defense, Amnesia, Body Press, and Rest, and it could try similar tricks in PU, but its impact was never a lasting one. As a result, Runerigus languished in that desolate no Pokemon's limbo land of untiered. And in a moment of true horror, you feel the thematic gut punch of the namesake of its lonely Wandering Spirit ability. As for Cofagrigus, it was much better off. While it didn't possess Runerigus' ground type resistances, it also didn't possess its significant weaknesses to water, grass, and ice, making it a largely better hit taker. In the early stages of NU, it was once again one of the best setup sweepers in the tier. It wasn't up to its own nasty plots though. Why? Because with Generation 8's decision to remove Hidden Power, Cofagrigus could no longer utilize the crucial coverage Hidden Power fighting had provided in previous generations. It went a different route though, with Iron Defense and the newly added Body Press in addition to its monstrous base 145 defense stat. Cofagrigus became an unkillable killing machine in one fell swoop. It still used Shadow Ball of course, maintaining that excellent fighting ghost coverage combination, and matter of fact, the Pokemon it most needed Shadow Ball for was none other than opposing Cofagrigus. Now it still utilized Trick Room, once again turning its awful speed into an advantage, but sometimes dipped into more experimental territory with rest sets that weren't hindered by the loss of their leftovers or being hit by Toxic, occasionally even going so far as to run Chesto Berry. Cofagrigus maintained this impressive stat as one of NU's top threats throughout the Isle of Armor. However, the onslaught of power creep brought about by the Crown Tundra proved to be too much for it. Its lack of a reliable recovery and necessity for prolonged setup meant it was excessively difficult for Cofagrigus to keep up in this more fast-paced metagame. As such, it dropped out of NU for the first time ever, and for a brief time even dropped past PU and into untiered, but eventually its value in PU was recognized, and it rose into the tier through usage. It distinguished itself from fellow ghost types Jellicent and Palossand through its grass neutrality neutrality that allowed it to block rapid spins from Eldegoss, which was a game changer. It also piled onto the hazard game for its team by providing toxic spikes. There was plenty of ghost type competition in the tier, and Rotom and Frostlass were also excellent, but in addition to the aforementioned traits, Cofagrigus' monstrous bulk and potential to sweep with iron defense and body press ensured it had a legitimate place in Gen 8 PU. I kept you on tenterhooks about how good Runerigus is in doubles, and the time has now come to reveal it's not very good, sorry. Runerigus had some fun early meta applications of Wandering Spirit, such as passing it huge power from a Diggersby U-turn, but these were gimmicks that honestly weren't viable competitively. Runerigus' main advantage over Cofagrigus as a mon is its ground typing and ability to attack from the physical side of the spectrum. Thing is, what you want out of your ghost type Trick Room setter is bulk, and the ground type mainly just adds weaknesses so Rune could get knocked out before doing its main job. Nevertheless, Runerigus had one pretty impressive performance in the Sword and Shield era thanks to a Japanese player, Wataru Arai. Arai used an iron defense body press Runerigus alongside weakness policy Metagross to make top 8 at the 2021 Japan National Championship. And while Bulldoze with Metagross was fairly common, Arai just indexed fully into firepower, meaning once Trick Room went up, he had two very bulky, very powerful mons the opponent needed to deal with. Arai's performance was good enough to net him a day 2 invite to the delayed World Championship, where he didn't use Runerigus. But hey, it did its job. And that's it. So how good were Cofagrigus and Runerigus actually? Well, Cofagrigus has had quite an excellent competitive career, and an unusual one at that. From an outstanding part in Generation 5 UU to a surprising turn in Generation 6 OU, it continued lower tier excellence in Generation 7 and 8. Runerigus has not been so fortunate, sadly. So hopefully it receives a bit of a boost so that it may be more than the outclassed lump it has been thus far, though it did have the brief shining moment where it completely shut down Toxtricity's antics in UU. Thanks for watching, everyone, and thank you so much to the patrons for continued support of our videos, and thank you to everyone else watching as well. And as always, if you liked the video and you want to see more, be sure to subscribe to Fall Swipe Gaming for more weekly Pokemon content. And in the comments, I want to know, what do you think about competitive Cofagrigus and Runerigus? How would you buff Runerigus? Whatever it is, let me know in the comments, and follow my crew on these social media platforms. And that's all I got. See you next time, everyone.